CGI can be a magnificent tool in the right environment, and is continually helping create new, utterly stupendous visuals each and every year. But there's just nothing quite like witnessing something undeniably real going down in front of your stunned eyeballs on the big screen. This is WhatCulture, and here are movie scenes shot for real. The bin throw took 33 takes, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Before this list gets to the exploding medical facilities and human infernos, it's first time to look at just how much effort and determination is sometimes necessary to nail something as seemingly simple as chucking a parcel into a bin. There comes a moment during the legendary action comedy Scott Pilgrim vs. the World when Michael Cera's titular bass player is seen trying to casually sink a no-look shot after receiving a package from delivery girl Ramona Flowers. However, as revealed in the flick's outtakes, this wasn't just a case of pulling the old throw an object out of frame and then have someone else dump what appears to be that same item at the target trick. Nope, Cera legitimately had to pull off that rather difficult feat, and it actually ended up taking a whopping 33 attempts before the actor successfully launched the parcel into the trash can. The moment certainly could have been achieved using a bit of subtle movie magic, but Edgar Wright was convinced his star had it in him to genuinely score an effortless three-pointer, and patiently sat through 32 often frustratingly close misses to get this rather cool real shot.
Sigourney Weaver blindly sinks a basketball, Alien Resurrection. Alien Resurrection may be one of the more contested movies in the franchise, but it also lays claim to one of the most low-key, cool moments in the series. In order to display the Ripley clone's physical prowess, we see her throw a basketball over her head and sink it in the hoop behind her without even looking. Given that the ball disappears out of frame before flying through the basket, most audiences would understandably assume that the winning ball was simply CGI. But incredibly, Weaver actually sunk the shot herself, having trained for 10 days and landing 1 out of every 6 baskets on average during practice. Time was scheduled to allow Weaver to try and sink the shot, and after spending all day failing, she was given one final chance to pull it off. That was her single successful basket, causing co-star Ron Perlman to accidentally break character out of sheer surprise. As a result, the editors had to abruptly cut away after the ball sinks through the net.
Kingpin, 3 strikes in a row. There's no escaping the fact that some shots are always going to be more difficult than others to capture in one go. For example, a scene depicting an actor picking up an apple, in theory, will be far easier to nail in one than, say, bowling 3 strikes in a row. Yet when it came time to shoot that exact sort of sequence in Peter and Bobby Farrelly's sports comedy flick Kingpin, the directors weren't counting on their leading man smashing it out of the park on the first try. But seeing as though said star went by the name of Bill Murray, something special was always on the cards, right? Despite the brothers both admitting that the shot, which involved Murray's Ernie Bigger and McCracken pulling off the trifecta of strikes in a row, would likely take a while to get, masterful Murray had other ideas. In quite literally the first 3 shots he threw in front of the camera, the comedy legend hit a legit turkey. Needless to say, those extras in attendance didn't do much acting by the time the 3rd ball hit the pins. The corn was planted for this scene, Interstellar. That the masterful Christopher Nolan will often do whatever it takes to keep CGI and digital VFX away from his precious movies. With that in mind, you'll no doubt remember that tremendous sequence during the sci-fi epic that was Interstellar, when Matthew McConaughey's Joseph Cooper is seen chasing down a drone through acres of crops. But rather than opt for a digital feel to send that truck speeding through, Nolan desired some real corn, of course. So after watching Zack Snyder's Man of Steel and that flick's Fields of Corn, the mind behind the Dark Knight trilogy asked his fellow superhero feature director how much you could genuinely grow practically. After discovering how they'd managed to drop 100 acres of real crop for that Superman picture, the Interstellar team found a suitable location just outside of Calgary, and ended up not only growing corn, but producing enough to actually make money from it. This was, as Nolan put it, down to the fact they didn't actually destroy enough of the plants during the pulsating moments when stunt guys would go crashing through the crops for real for the sequence. But what do you think is the most impressive stunt in a Nolan movie? Is it this crop run or something else? You let me know down below.
The T-1000 flies a chopper under a bridge, Terminator 2 Judgment Day. One of Terminator 2's most underappreciated yet mind-bogglingly impressive practical stunts occurs during the climactic third act chase, where the T-1000 is pursuing the heroes in a commandeered police helicopter. There's a heart-stopping beat where the T-1000 nonchalantly flies the chopper under a freeway overpass with mere feet between the helicopter's rotor and the bridge above it. Though it's easy to assume there was some state-of-the-art trickery at play here, the brief beat was shot with no Hollywood tricks whatsoever. That's literally a stunt pilot flying a chopper 4 feet off the ground while riding under an overpass with a minuscule margin of error. In Terminator 2's DVD commentary, Cameron confirmed that the appointed camera crew actually refused to shoot the scene because it was so dangerous, and so Cameron resorted to filming it himself. That this was done for real without any injury or loss of life is frankly astonishing.
Kill Bill Volume 1. Chopping a baseball in half. Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill features aren't exactly lacking in the impressive swordplay department, it has to be said. But arguably the most impressive feat performed by a person wielding a blade throughout the entire two-part epic didn't actually come in the midst of a jaw-dropping battle or nail-biting duel. As Uma Thurman's The Bride takes a closer look at Ettore Anzo's collection of swords, the latter decides to launch a baseball at her, a decision which results in the object being swiftly sliced in two mid-flight. Now, while it would have likely been much easier to cut away from the bride as she swings the blade at the ball, and then jump back to the split item below, Tarantino decided on a different approach in the end. Thanks to the insanely talented stunt performer Zoe Bell being on hand to double for Thurman, the director was able to genuinely capture the moments of the ball being cut in half with a samurai sword. Sure, whooping a room full of armed warriors' asses with ease is pretty cool, but legitimately playing Fruit Ninja with a baseball is next level badass. Those squirrels really cracked nuts, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. You know when Johnny Depp's version of the iconic Willy Wonka tells the various guests wandering around his chocolate factory that his collection of squirrels was specially trained to get the nuts out of shells? Well, that's actually closer to the truth than you likely assumed. Because director Tim Burton preferred the idea of using real squirrels in his 2005 adaptation of Roald Dahl's famous novel, an eventual 40 rodents were brought in and trained for the scene, involving Veruca Salt being classed as a bad nut and attacked by the little creatures. A grand total of 19 weeks was spent turning these various squirrels into animals that could comfortably leave their crates and perform the trick of picking up a nut and dumping it into a metal bowl on camera. CGI was still used for those shots that involved the critters interacting closely with Julia Winter's Veruca, and animatronics were also in play in the background for certain moments too. But a ton of the nut cracking / handling, and even parts of the rodent attack on Veruca, well, Winter's stunt double, were performed by a bunch of very real and well-trained squirrels.
Mid-air zipline between two planes, Cliffhanger. 1993's classic Sylvester Stallone starring thriller Cliffhanger opens with a jaw-dropping heist sequence in which a gang of international thieves attempts to steal $100 million in uncirculated bills by literally sending them down a zipline from one plane to another, complete with the thieves themselves. Audiences would be totally forgiven for assuming that the shot of a terrorist sliding from one plane to another was simply added in post-production. However, it was actually the result of the most expensive aerial stunt ever performed at the time. A stunt so insane, in fact, that the film's insurance company refused to insure a stunt performer to do it, as well as being illegal in the filming location of Europe. Ultimately, stuntman Simon Crane was paid a cool $1 million, reportedly taken out of Stallone's own salary, to perform an entirely practical aerial transfer at 15,000 feet, after the crew returned to the US. Crane later recounted that the stunt very nearly went fatally wrong, as he had to quickly pull his parachute in order to escape getting sucked into a plane engine, hence why we never actually see him land in the second plane in the movie, albeit disguised by clever editing.
The Dark Knight Rises, crashing this plane! As we'll note a few more times before this list reaches its dramatic conclusion, Christopher Nolan isn't one to rely heavily on the world of computer generation. If it's written in his script, you can bet the world-class director is going to do everything in his power to authentically bring it to life. One of the most notable examples of Nolan going the genuine extra mile to ensure he sees the audience's attention from the very first scene of his creation can be found in the third entry of his Dark Knight trilogy. Instead of heading down the much safer route of crafting a believable CGI imagining of Bane and his crew hijacking and then dropping a plane out of the sky, the director went ahead and did it for real. Admittedly, the actual exchange that went down within the jet was done inside of a simulator. Yet when it came to said crashing of the plane being towed by Bane and his boys, the sight of the full-scale prop aircraft dropping into Scotland's Cairngorm Mountains is about as legit as it gets. Zoe Bell is very much hanging on, death-proof. When you hire a truly fearless stunt performer to act in your flick, you better believe they won't be letting someone else throw themselves into whatever dangerous scenarios their director has in mind. Sure enough, after being hired by Quentin Tarantino to play a version of herself for his 2007 vehicular slasher known as Death Proof, Zoe Bell was happy to dive into whatever stunts QT had planned for her character in the picture. That commitment to being as involved in these perilous moments as much as possible ultimately led to easily the film's most iconic moments being born. That being the sequence involving Bell hanging onto the front of a muscle car as Kurt Russell's stuntman Mike McKay attempts to run it off the road. The real-life stuntwoman's willingness to actually flail around the hood of the vehicle as it sped down the road made the shooting of these intense collisions far simpler than usual too. Instead of having to reshoot moments where you typically wouldn't want to see the double's face, the team was simply able to position the camera anywhere they liked, and shoot Bell hanging on for dear life during these really long takes, as she recalled. This all resulted in a sequence that routinely left you feeling utterly terrified and wonderfully stressed out. Largely because what you were witnessing was achieved without any CGI and with no BS, as Bell herself put it.
Tuco's chain gets cut by a train, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's not much of a secret that spaghetti westerns played pretty fast and loose with health and safety laws back in the day, especially in those films directed by the great Sergio Leone. While shooting his indelible masterpiece The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, this resulted in 3 separate incidents where Tuco actor Eli Wallach was very nearly killed, one of which left Wallach mere seconds away from fatal disaster. For the scene where Tuco escapes captivity and uses an incoming train to cut his chain, Leone insisted that Wallach perform the stunt himself, and further guaranteed him that this was entirely safe to do so. Yet neither Leone nor any of his crew had accounted for the train's heavy iron steps which protruded out of all of the boxcars, and so it was nothing more than dumb luck that an oblivious Wallach stood up at the right time, or he would unquestionably have been killed by the steps. That's not to ignore the sheer riskiness of placing an actor that close to a train track, with the very real possibility of debris being catapulted into their path. Crazy times.
Die Hard 4.0. An epic vehicular collision. The character of John McClane isn't the only thing that has outrageously evolved over the course of the increasingly insane Die Hard series. The extreme set pieces have been dialed up to 11 too, and then some. In the case of the 4th flick the franchise served up in 2007, Die Hard 4.0 aka Live Free or Die Hard. This obsession with taking things up a few notches manifested itself in the sight of a police car being sent flying through the air before it collided with an unfortunately hovering helicopter. The sequence took 3 weeks to rehearse, and in order to achieve the desired visual, 2 shots were combined when all was said and done. That of the car smashing into the copter and the stuntman diving out of that flying vehicle. It must be said that this shot wasn't completely CGI-free by the time it hit theaters, as the helicopter's rotor blades were digitally added and the cables used to hold it in the air were removed in the editing suite. But aside from a few digital touch-ups here and there, that is very much a car exploding.
Peter catches MJ's lunch tray, Spider-Man. Sam Raimi's original Spider-Man movie is jam-packed with delightfully cartoonish moments which feel ripped from the pages of the comic book, not least the unforgettable beat where the newly heroic Peter Parker impromptu catches Mary Jane's lunch tray after she slips over. The prevailing assumption for years was that the shot was achieved primarily through CGI, with Tobey Maguire simply catching the tray while all of its contents were added digitally during post-production. But the movie's DVD commentary actually confirmed that the scene was shot entirely in camera, albeit with some relatively minor assistance. For starters, Maguire had some sticky glue applied to his fingertips to help him grip the lunch tray easier, while all the objects were dropped from above by stagehands, with magnets helping them cling to the tray. But the fundamentals of the scene were all Tobey Maguire, which he reportedly achieved after a staggering 156 takes.
Skyfall, fighting on a train. Sam Mendes' universally acclaimed Skyfall is by no means a film completely void of CGI. One quick glance at Daniel Craig's mitts in the film's Komodo dragon fight sequence confirms as much. Yet it may come as a bit of a surprise to hear that one of the film's most spectacular sequences didn't actually lean as heavily on digital assistance as you'd imagine. As Bond throws down with a mercenary on top of a speeding train, Eve Moneypenny attempts to pick off the enemy with a sniper rifle, a move which results in 007 going for an abrupt swim after a dizzying tumble off a bridge. Not one to shy away from getting his hands dirty for the role, Craig could very much be found clambering over a digger, jumping onto the back of a half-torn-off carriage, and even throwing down on top of the moving vehicle while shooting the captivating scene. There's surely safer and much less terrifying ways to earn a paycheck than being battered on top of a rickety train. The Joker's hospital explosion, The Dark Knight. Back to the bloke who would rather legit crash a Boeing 747 into a building than achieve that visual through CGI. Christopher Nolan also once decided that he wanted to actually demolish a building when the Joker opted to blow up Gotham General Hospital in The Dark Knight. This wasn't a case of the world-class director simply wandering up to the nearest empty hospital and inquiring about whether he could strap some dynamite to the poor thing though. Instead, the team behind the Bat flick eventually discovered they would be able to completely destroy the abandoned Brax candy factory in Chicago. So Nolan and co. simply dressed the building up to look like Gotham General and proceeded to use this real demolition for Mr. J's iconic explosive moment. With this chaos only going down once too, this meant the entire sequence had to be captured in one magnificent take. But the team were able to brilliantly do exactly that, managing to capture the fantastic shot of Heath Ledger's Joker taking a moment to check his detonator hadn't malfunctioned, before genuinely raising an entire building behind him.
A house falls on Buster Keaton, Steamboat Bill Jr. Buster Keaton was famed for his elaborately staged set pieces, which, more often than not, placed the actor in the epicenter of danger. Audiences can't really be blamed for figuring that some trickery was afoot for one of his most iconic stunts. Steamboat Bill Jr. climaxes with the front of a building collapsing on top of him, with the open attic window providing Keaton with a small hole so that he isn't crushed to death. Though even in 1928 it would have been possible to achieve such a set piece with basic optical effects, Keaton decided to do it the hard way, dropping a 2-ton building facade with a margin of error measuring only a couple of inches. It's been suggested that Keaton was suicidal due to numerous personal issues, and the actor himself later even said, "I was mad at the time, or I would never have done the thing." The result is, without question, one of the most impressive stunts in movie history though.
Dunkirk, Dogfighting. Determined to go one better a few years on from dropping a prop plane out of the sky, Christopher Nolan decided to give us our most intimate look at aerial warfare to date by the time Dunkirk erupted onto our screens in 2017. In order to achieve the striking shots of Spitfires being tailed and attacked by Messerschmitt in the skies, Nolan had the planes used in the flick fitted with IMAX cameras, and each aircraft rigged with a dual cockpit to assist the filming process, on top of equipping the various planes involved in the actual maneuvers seen in the finished article with cameras. A Piper Aerostar boasting an IMAX camera on its front and back was also used to pick up footage of the awe-inspiring aerial duels. In one of the more shocking turn of events to go down whilst filming the World War II epic, one of the aforementioned planes that was ditched in the English Channel during the sequence that sees Jack Lowden's Collins trying to evacuate the aircraft sank quicker than expected. Then, after eventually rescuing the plane and the IMAX camera within it, Nolan was able to salvage the footage and ultimately use it in the film. What a happy accident. Jon Favreau snuck in one real shot, The Lion King. For a film that often looks and feels like you're watching a fully live-action cast of lions, hyenas, and other interesting creatures unleash many a show-stopping tune, Jon Favreau's The Lion King remake was almost entirely CGI. In fact, the finished feature contained a staggering 1,490 rendered shots that were created by the film's gifted animators and CG artists. But as noted by the film's director on Twitter/X after its release in 2019, there was actually one single shot in the roaring success that was 100% real. It just so happened to be the very first shot of the entire flick too. That moment when a couple of trees are seen standing in the middle of the Pride Lands as the legendary Circle of Life begins was genuinely photographed in Africa, with Favreau opting to chuck this moment into his picture just to see if anyone would notice. With the first few seconds of this billion-dollar hit looking about as realistic as the remaining 118 minutes though, there's a solid chance very few realised they were taking in an actual shot of Africa as that iconic tune got underway.
Bond skis off a cliff, The Spy Who Loved Me. Roger Moore's third James Bond film, The Spy Who Loved Me, is hardly a franchise classic, but it does open with one of the most memorable moments in the entire 007 canon. The pre-title sequence climaxes with Bond skiing off the edge of a cliff in order to escape his pursuers, after which he daringly parachutes to safety, with the Union Jack bearing parachute, of course. To do it, stuntman Rick Sylvester and a small crew camped out in a neighbouring village for 10 days waiting for the right weather conditions to perform the stunt, and due to its technical complexity, it was captured by simply pointing a number of cameras in Sylvester's direction and choosing the best unbroken take. Sylvester was paid $30,000 for the stunt, which ended up costing a total of $500,000, making it the most expensive stunt ever performed at that time. The end result remains an absolute showstopper over 40 years later, clearly time, money and effort well spent.
Crank fighting on the side of a helicopter. In perhaps the biggest understatement in the history of action cinema, Jason Statham is one fearless son of a gun. Over the course of the star's hard-hitting career, he's frequently been spotted getting up close and personal with hordes of unfortunate goobers, and even came dangerously close to death on the back of a truck refusing to stop and sending him crashing into the Black Sea while shooting The Expendables 3. Yet one of his most underappreciated acts of insanity came in the form of an adrenaline-fueled outbreak of fisticuffs in the closing stages of 2006's Crank. Oh, and said throwdown just so happened to go down whilst hanging on the side of a helicopter, 3,000 feet high in the air, no less. Despite the stuntmen on set stressing to the star that he most definitely did not need to commit to this ridiculously dangerous stunt, Statham was having none of it. Hilariously, when asked by folks how he trained for the nutty sequence depicting him dangling high above Los Angeles, Statham replied, "How do you train for hanging out of a helicopter? You just go and do it. Rather you than us, Jason, mate. Those greenhouses actually exist. Blade Runner 2049. Speaking of real-world locations being snuck into an epic feature, Denis Villeneuve managed to utilize a truly mesmerizing location for a scene at the start of his terrific Blade Runner 2049. Early on in that sequel to Ridley Scott's classic sci-fi film, Ryan Gosling's Nexus 9 replicant K can be seen heading out to retire Dave Bautista's Nexus 8 replicant Sapper Morton. As K flies to the latter's location, he's found soaring over what looks like a collection of futuristic, digitally created greenhouses. But looks can be deceiving. These greenhouses can actually be found around the town of El Ejido in Almeria, Spain, with the majority of the ones here in these opening moments of 2049 being photographed for real. Though John Nelson, who won an Academy Award for his superb visual effects work on the flick, would note that on top of shooting aerial plates in Spain and Iceland, some CG elements were eventually added to this opening stretch. For the most part though, the awe-inspiring visuals seen as Kay closes in on Sapper's farm were of the real deal, with those greenhouses actually producing between 2.5 million to 3.5 million tons of fruit and vegetables every single year.
Charles lifts Mary into the clock tower, The Stranger. Orson Welles' 1946 film noir The Stranger features a feat of strength so distracting everyone just assumes it was achieved through typical movie trickery. Near the end of the movie, Charles lifts Mary from a ladder into the clock tower where he's standing, impressively using just one hand to do so. Initially, Young was rigged up with a harness in case the stuntman performing the shot dropped her, but after numerous takes it was clear that there was no way to conceal the rigging cable running up her sleeve. And so, Young asked the stuntman if there was any chance of him dropping her without a harness, and when he replied in the negative, she instructed the stuntman, cut the cable or we're going to be here all day. The next take was mercifully pulled off without a hitch, and ended up being the one used in the final film, while Wells was none the wiser about the massive risk Young took to speed things along.
True Lies Helicopter Rescue. What is it with movie stars wanting to do their own helicopter stunts, eh? Over a decade before the Stath was hanging onto the side of a helicopter for dear life, none other than Jamie Lee Curtis was making that act look like child's play in 1994's iconic action comedy True Lies. After director James Cameron approached the star about the idea of performing her own stunts for the exhilarating closing stages of the action-packed feature, Curtis brilliantly retorted by asking him where he'd be whilst all this was going on. Without missing a beat, the future Titanic and Avatar Helmer replied that he'd be hanging out the door filming you with a handheld camera. That was all Curtis needed to hear, as she buckled up to be dragged from a limousine roof by Arnold Schwarzenegger and into the air, all whilst hanging below a helicopter. The star did admit that her stunt double, Donna Keegan, also worked on the scene too. But at more than a few notable points in the sequence, that is absolutely Curtis risking it all. Russell Crowe actually hung onto a helicopter, proof of life. The acting superstar known as Russell Crowe has never been shy about getting his hands dirty during the making of a movie. But particularly in his younger years, he perhaps took what he himself classes as some stupid risks whilst trying to bring a scene to the screen. One specific stunt while shooting Taylor Hackford's action thriller Proof of Life got a little too real for the gladiator thespian. As Crowe eventually told Nova's Chrissy Sam and Brownie, a moment early on in the feature required him to hang onto the side of a helicopter as Terry Thorne whilst the aircraft took off. The vehicle then ended up taking off and reaching 100 feet in the air, with Crowe's grip on a strap being the only thing that kept him from falling to his death. He'd even recall how Hackford told the pilot to go harder in one take, leading to the actor getting like 20 cuts across his face after an explosion went off in the battlefield below. Put simply, there was absolutely nothing fake about the shot of a terrified Crowe dangling out of this helicopter, folks.
The Coma Doof Warrior, Mad Max Fury Road. Mad Max Fury Road is a fantastic example of a movie which uses a lot more CGI than audiences think it does, but deploys it in an extremely clever way to accentuate the practical action rather than distract from it. One of the most memorable aspects of the movie is the guitar-clad, onesie-wearing character harnessed into one of Immortan Joe's vehicles, eventually identified as the Coma Doof Warrior. Now, there's no shame in assuming that an actor wasn't really strapped into a vehicular rig and allowed to fire actual flames out of a guitar, but that's exactly what happened. Australian musician Iota played the character, which amounted to spending 8 hours a day for months strapped into the vehicle as it drove speeds of up to 40 miles per hour, while playing a guitar which, due to the flamethrower rigging, weighed 130 pounds. Iota was able to control the flames by using the guitar's whammy bar, and hilariously, the flamethrower was only added by the production team after director George Miller complained that it didn't work for real.
Iron Man 3 Air Force One Fall. Though the Marvel Cinematic Universe undoubtedly has an awful lot going for it, one of the major criticisms the studio has faced over the last decade or so is the need to perhaps pump a little too much CGI into their larger-than-life superhero projects. Yet said critique was nowhere to be seen in the third Iron Man feature, as Shane Black helped orchestrate one of the single most impressive stunts you're ever likely to see on the big screen. To pull off the gripping sight of various passengers being sucked out of Air Force One and falling to what appears to be their certain deaths, the stunt team behind the flick did not hold back. After first leaning towards a green screen assisted execution of the eventual sequence, the Red Bull skydiving team were brought in to shoot the complicated fall from the sky. Specifically designed costumes equipped with hidden parachutes were created, and 600 parachute jumps were carried out to capture the scene, with CGI only being used to add clouds, the erupting plane, the Iron Man armor onto a stand-in, and parts of the Florida coastline below. All in all, that's pretty damn impressive. Tony Jaa's legs were actually set on fire. Ong Bak Muay Thai Warrior. The sensational Tony Jaa has helped unleash some of the most remarkable and gorgeously creative action ever to land on the big screen. From skipping over incoming adversaries like a stone over a lake, to throwing out kicks that look like moving pieces of majestic art. Jaa is the highly physical and acrobatic gift that just keeps on giving. But arguably the most impressive entirely real moment he's ever been a part of in a feature came whilst playing his first major role in Ong Bak Muay Thai Warrior. Whilst engaging in combat at a gas station during the flick, Jaa's Muay Thai master Ting only ends up setting his legs on fire mid-fight. This wasn't achieved via any digital wizardry either. That was Jaa himself bursting from the flames with genuinely burning legs in front of the camera. He did not make it out of that ridiculously badass moment unharmed though. As he told the aptly titled Firecracker magazine, the martial arts expert suffered a few burns during the shooting of that hot brawl. The fire spread up his trousers so quickly as they worked through the scene, Jaa's eyebrows, eyelashes, and nose were all burned early on. But the actor still dusted himself off and put himself through another few takes to ensure the insane showdown looked as awesome as possible in the finished article. Mission accomplished.
Werner Herzog pulls a 320-ton steamboat over a huge hill, Fitzcarraldo. Werner Herzog's 1982 masterpiece Fitzcarraldo stars Klaus Kinski as the title character who, with the aid of the Peruvian natives, has a 320-ton steamboat pulled over a large hill and into a neighbouring river. A fine plot point for a film, yet one which would absolutely necessitate the use of a soundstage or models, unless your name is Werner Herzog, that is. Even for Herzog's practical predilections, this was an especially insane undertaking, and the director ultimately turned down funding from Fox due to their desire to shoot these scenes entirely with miniatures. Instead, Herzog spent 3 years figuring out how to pull off the stunt for real, including building an actual steamer and hiring a crew to get the thing hauled over the hill. Though there's an undeniable practical physicality to the film, the central feat is so extreme in its commitment to method that even Herzog diehards might assume that there was some technical sleight of hand at play. Astoundingly, the director got it done the hard way and promptly dubbed himself Conquistador of the Useless.
Tenet, blowing up this plane! Ending our list in as spectacular a way as possible. After initially planning on producing the moment a Boeing 747 collided with a hangar in Tenet by using miniatures and digital wizardry, a number of old planes were stumbled upon while scouting for locations in Victorville, California. This suddenly triggered an idea in Nolan's head, and before long he decided that actually crashing a very real 747 would be much more cost-effective in the long run, not to mention much cooler. So that's precisely what the special effects team behind the picture did, and the end results delivered one of the most magnificent stunts ever committed to film. In a movie that routinely finds joy in leaving you scratching your head, this was a moment just about everyone on the planet could understand. Massive plane goes smashing into building and explodes for realsies. What more do you want?